My name is Catherine Williams. I'm 35 years old, and on the day I buried my beloved husband David after his sudden death from a heart attack at age 37, not a single member of my family attended his funeral because they had all chosen instead to celebrate my sister Rebecca's engagement party at an exclusive country club, leaving me to say goodbye to the love of my life, surrounded only by David's family and friends, while my own blood relatives toasted champagne and posted joyful social media photos just 20 miles away. What they didn't know was that their heartless abandonment during the darkest moment of my life had revealed their true characters so completely that I was about to use David's substantial life insurance policy and my own strategic planning to ensure they would face consequences for their cruelty that would strip away every financial security they had taken for granted, while teaching them that some betrayals are so devastating they destroy family relationships permanently and irreversibly. The sudden loss of my husband David had shattered my world in ways I never could have imagined possible, transforming me from a happily married woman planning our future together into a widow facing the overwhelming grief and practical challenges of rebuilding my entire life without the partner who had been my best friend, greatest supporter, and the center of my emotional universe for the 12 years we had been together since meeting in college. David Williams had been a successful software architect who worked for a major technology company in Seattle, earning a substantial salary that had allowed us to build a comfortable life together while saving for the house we planned to buy and the children we hoped to have once we felt financially ready to expand our family and create the kind of stable, loving home that both of us had dreamed about since our early relationship. The heart attack that claimed David's life had occurred without warning on a Tuesday evening in March while we were having dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant to celebrate his recent promotion to senior architect, a career milestone that represented years of hard work and dedication to his profession. One moment he was laughing about a funny story from his office, and the next he was collapsed on the restaurant floor while paramedics worked frantically to save his life during the ambulance ride to the hospital, where doctors eventually told me that the massive cardiac event had caused too much damage to his heart for any medical intervention to be successful. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Williams," Dr. Patricia Martinez had said as she delivered the devastating news that would forever divide my life into before and after David's death. "Your husband suffered a massive myocardial infarction that affected multiple areas of his heart. Despite our best efforts with emergency surgery and life support, the damage was too extensive for his heart to recover. He passed peacefully without pain, and I want you to know that there was nothing anyone could have done differently to change this outcome." The shock of losing David so suddenly and unexpectedly was compounded by the immediate practical necessities of funeral planning, insurance claims, work notifications, and all the overwhelming logistical details that must be handled when someone dies, even while you're struggling to process the reality that your spouse is gone forever and that your entire future has been irrevocably changed by circumstances beyond your control or preparation. David's life insurance policy through his technology company was substantial, $800,000 plus additional benefits that would provide financial security during my grief and transition period. But the money felt meaningless compared to the devastating loss of the man I had expected to spend the rest of my life with, and the future we had been planning together. The insurance proceeds would allow me to take time off work to grieve properly and make thoughtful decisions about my next steps. But no amount of money could fill the emotional void that David's death had created, or restore the happiness and partnership that had defined our marriage. The funeral arrangements that I made during the days following David's death were designed to honor his memory and provide closure for everyone who had loved him, including his parents and siblings who were traveling from various states to attend the service, his colleagues and friends from work who wanted to pay their respects, and the extended network of people whose lives David had touched through his kindness, generosity, and genuine interest in helping others succeed professionally and personally. "David was one of the most decent people I've ever known," his manager Tom Chen had said when he called to offer condolences and support for whatever funeral arrangements I was making. and everyone at the company wants to attend the service to honor his memory and show our respect for the contributions he made to our team and the positive impact he had on everyone who worked with him. The funeral service was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at the beautiful Presbyterian church where David and I had been married 8 years earlier, followed by burial at the peaceful cemetery where David's grandparents were interred, and where we had already purchased plots for our own eventual burials during one of our practical conversations about estate planning and future preparations. I had chosen Saturday specifically because it would allow maximum attendance from family members and friends who needed to travel or take time off work to participate in celebrating David's life and supporting me during this devastating period. But while I was making careful preparations to ensure David's funeral would be meaningful and well attended, my family was apparently focused on entirely different priorities that would reveal the extent of their selfishness and complete disregard for my emotional needs during the most difficult experience of my life. My younger sister, Rebecca Martinez, was 31 years old and had recently become engaged to her boyfriend Trevor after a 3-year relationship that had been marked by multiple breakups, financial instability, and the kind of dramatic ups and downs that made most family members question whether their relationship was built on solid foundations or just physical attraction and shared interests in partying and social activities. Rebecca had always been the family member who demanded attention and prioritized her own needs above everyone else's consideration. But I had assumed that David's death would prompt her to show basic human decency and family loyalty by postponing any personal celebrations until after we had properly honored my husband's memory. Rebecca is so excited about her engagement. My mother, Patricia Williams, had mentioned during one of our conversations about funeral arrangements. And Trevor's parents are hosting this elaborate engagement party at their country club this weekend to celebrate the announcement and introduce the families. It's going to be a really special event. The timing of Rebecca's engagement party for the same weekend as David's funeral was initially concerning, but not necessarily problematic, since I assumed that family members would prioritize attending the funeral over a party, especially given the circumstances of David's sudden death and my need for family support during this devastating period. I had specifically chosen Saturday afternoon for the service to accommodate people's schedules, and I expected that anyone with conflicting social commitments would understand that a funeral takes precedence over recreational activities. I'm sure Rebecca will reschedule her party, or at least make sure it doesn't conflict with David's service, I told David's mother, Eleanor, when she expressed concern about potential scheduling conflicts affecting family attendance. Losing David is a family tragedy that should bring everyone together to support each other, regardless of other social obligations or celebration plans. But as the funeral date approached and I began receiving RSVPs from family members, I discovered that my assumptions about their priorities and basic human decency were completely wrong, and that they had made choices that would reveal their true characters in ways that would permanently destroy our relationships. The first indication that my family's priorities were fundamentally different from mine came when my cousin Jennifer called to explain why she wouldn't be able to attend David's funeral, using language that suggested she viewed the scheduling conflict as equally valid choices between two social events rather than understanding that a funeral represents a sacred obligation that supersedes recreational activities. "Catherine, I'm so sorry for your loss," Jennifer said during our phone conversation, "but I've already committed to attending Rebecca's engagement party, and Trevor's family has put so much money and effort into planning this celebration that it would be rude to cancel at the last minute. I know you'll understand that these kinds of scheduling conflicts happen sometimes." The characterization of David's funeral as a scheduling conflict with Rebecca's party was so callous and inappropriate that I initially assumed Jennifer had misunderstood the situation or didn't realize that she was comparing a sacred ceremony honoring my deceased husband with a recreational social event that could easily be rescheduled or attended by some family members, while others fulfilled their obligations to support me during my grief. "Jennifer, this is my husband's funeral," I replied, trying to make the moral distinction clear. "David died suddenly and unexpectedly, and I need family support during the most difficult day of my life." Rebecca's party is a celebration that can be rescheduled, but we only have one opportunity to properly honor David's memory and say goodbye. But Jennifer's response revealed that she had indeed understood the choice she was making and had decided that Rebecca's party was more important than providing support to a grieving family member during a funeral that represented the final ceremony honoring my husband's life. "I understand that you're grieving," Jennifer said, "but Rebecca is family too, and her engagement party is also important to the family. These things happen, and everyone has to make their own choices about which events they can attend." The casual dismissal of my husband's funeral as just another event that family members could choose to attend based on their personal preferences was devastating and revealed a level of selfishness and insensitivity that I had never expected from people who claimed to love and support me. But Jennifer's call was followed by similar conversations with other family members who had apparently coordinated their decisions to prioritize Rebecca's party over David's funeral, treating my husband's death as less important than my sister's social celebration, and my grief as less significant than Rebecca's desire for maximum family attendance at her engagement announcement. My Aunt Linda called with a similar explanation, expressing sincere condolences, while simultaneously informing me that she had chosen to attend Rebecca's party instead of David's funeral because the whole family will be there, and it's such a special milestone for Rebecca that deserves family celebration. "Linda, my husband just died," I said, struggling to understand how anyone could view an engagement party as more important than a funeral, "and I need my family's support during the ceremony that honors his life and provides closure for everyone who loved him. How can Rebecca's party be more important than being present while I bury my husband?" But Linda was unmoved by my emotional appeal and continued to justify her decision based on what she characterized as competing family obligations, rather than understanding that funeral attendance represents a fundamental human decency that takes precedence over recreational social activities. "Catherine, I know this is difficult for you," Linda replied, "but Rebecca's engagement is a once-in-a-lifetime celebration, and the party has been planned for months with family members coming from out of state. Your grief is understandable, but life has to go on, and we can't let sad events prevent us from celebrating happy occasions." The suggestion that David's funeral was a sad event that shouldn't prevent family members from celebrating happy occasions revealed such a fundamental misunderstanding of grief, family obligation, and human decency that I realized my relatives had made conscious choices to prioritize my sister's party over supporting me during the most devastating experience of my life. Have you ever needed your family's support during your darkest hour only to discover that they viewed your tragedy as less important than someone else's party? That's exactly what I experienced as every single member of my extended family chose Rebecca's engagement celebration over David's funeral, leaving me to face my husband's burial surrounded only by his relatives and friends, while my own blood relatives celebrated 20 miles away. The most devastating betrayal came when my own parents, Patricia and Robert Williams, called to inform me that they had also chosen to attend Rebecca's engagement party instead of David's funeral, treating their decision as reasonable family management rather than recognizing it as abandonment of their daughter during the most difficult moment of her life. "Catherine, honey, we want you to know how sorry we are about David," my mother said during what I assumed would be a conversation about funeral arrangements and family coordination. "But we've decided that we need to attend Rebecca's engagement party because it's such an important milestone for her. And Trevor's parents have invested so much in creating a beautiful celebration for the families." The casual announcement that my own parents had chosen my sister's party over my husband's funeral was so shocking and hurtful that I initially couldn't respond, struggling to process that the people who had raised me and claimed to love me had made a conscious decision to abandon me during my greatest crisis in favor of attending a recreational social event. "Mom, this is David's funeral," I finally managed to say. "He was your son-in-law for 8 years, and I'm your daughter who just lost her husband suddenly and unexpectedly. How can you choose Rebecca's party over being with me while I bury the most important person in my life?" But Patricia was prepared for my emotional response and had apparently rehearsed justifications that she believed would make their abandonment seem reasonable, rather than recognizing it as cruel betrayal of their basic parental obligations during their daughter's time of greatest need. "Rebecca is our daughter too," Patricia replied, "and her engagement only happens once. We can visit David's grave any time, but we can't recreate this special moment for Rebecca if we miss her party. Besides, you have David's family there to support you, so you won't be alone." The suggestion that visiting David's grave anytime was equivalent to being present during his funeral ceremony revealed such a fundamental misunderstanding of grief and loss that I realized my mother had never truly understood the depth of my relationship with David or the magnitude of devastation his death had created in my life. But Patricia's comment about Rebecca's engagement only happening once, while dismissing David's funeral as something that could be commemorated later, was particularly cruel, since funerals are singular ceremonies that provide irreplaceable opportunities for community grieving and final farewells that cannot be recreated or postponed for the convenience of people with conflicting social obligations. "This funeral only happens once, too," I replied. "And it's the last time we'll all be together to honor David's memory and say goodbye to someone who was a beloved family member for 8 years. Rebecca's party is a celebration that could be rescheduled, but we can never have another opportunity to properly commemorate David's life." But my parents had clearly made their decision based on their assessment that Rebecca's happiness was more important than my grief, and that an engagement party represented a more significant family milestone than supporting their daughter through the funeral of her husband and life partner. "Catherine, you need to understand that this party is very important to Rebecca." Robert joined the conversation. "And sometimes family members have to make difficult choices about which events to attend when there are scheduling conflicts. We love you, and we're sorry for your loss, but we've committed to being at Rebecca's celebration." The characterization of choosing between my husband's funeral and my sister's party as difficult choices about scheduling conflicts was so inappropriate and hurtful that I realized my parents viewed David's death as an inconvenience that was disrupting their social calendar, rather than understanding it as a family tragedy that should bring everyone together to provide support and comfort. "There is no scheduling conflict," I said. "There is a funeral for a family member who died tragically young, and there is a party for someone who got engaged. One is a sacred obligation, and the other is a recreational activity. The fact that you can't distinguish between them tells me everything I need to know about your values and your priorities." What? But my parents were unmoved by my characterization of their choice as morally problematic, and they continued to defend their decision to abandon me during David's funeral in favor of celebrating Rebecca's engagement, as if both events held equal significance in family relationships and obligations. The conversation ended with my parents confirming that they would not be attending David's funeral, that they expected me to understand their choice, and that they hoped I would not let grief make you resentful about Rebecca's happiness, as if my emotional response to their abandonment was unreasonable rather than recognizing their behavior as fundamentally cruel and selfish. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my parents had revealed their true character in ways that would permanently damage our relationship, and that their abandonment during my husband's funeral would be an unforgivable betrayal that I would remember for the rest of my life, regardless of their future attempts to repair the harm they had caused through their selfish decision-making. The morning of David's funeral was gray and drizzly, with the kind of Pacific Northwest weather that seemed to match my emotional state as I prepared to say goodbye to my husband, while facing the devastating reality that none of my blood relatives would be present to provide support, comfort, or acknowledgement of the profound loss that David's death represented in my life and in our broader family relationships. The funeral service itself was beautiful and meaningful, with David's pastor delivering a moving eulogy that captured his kindness, integrity, and the positive impact he had made on everyone who knew him personally and professionally. The church was filled with David's family members, work colleagues, college friends, and neighbors who wanted to honor his memory and show their support for me during this devastating period. creating the kind of community presence that demonstrated how much David had been loved and respected by people whose lives he had touched. David was the kind of man who made everyone around him better, his colleague Maria Santos said during her tribute. He was generous with his knowledge, patient with people who were learning, and always willing to mentor younger developers who needed guidance. His technical expertise was impressive, but his character was what made him truly special. The tributes from David's friends and colleagues were both comforting and heartbreaking, as they painted a picture of the exceptional man I had lost and reminded me of all the ways he had enriched not just my life, but the lives of everyone who had known him. Each story and memory shared during the service reinforced how much love and support David had generated through his kindness and integrity, making the absence of my own family even more painful and noticeable. David's parents, Eleanor and James Williams, had been incredibly supportive throughout the planning process and during the service itself, treating me like their own daughter and ensuring that I felt surrounded by love and care, despite the abandonment I was experiencing from my blood relatives. "David loved you more than life itself," Eleanor whispered to me as we prepared to leave the church for the burial ceremony. "And we want you to know that you're not alone in this. You're our daughter now and always, and we'll be here to support you through whatever comes next in your healing and recovery." The love and acceptance I received from David's family was both comforting and painful, as it highlighted the contrast between people who understood family obligation and loyalty versus relatives who had chosen personal entertainment over providing support during a funeral that represented one of life's most sacred and difficult ceremonies. But the most devastating moment of the entire day came as we were standing graveside during the burial service, watching David's casket being lowered into the ground while the pastor spoke about eternal rest and the hope of resurrection. When my phone began buzzing insistently with calls and text messages that would reveal the full extent of my family's callousness and inappropriate priorities. The first text message was from my mother. "Rebecca's party is absolutely beautiful. Wish you could be here to see how happy she is. We need to talk as soon as possible about family obligations and supporting each other during important milestones." The message was so breathtakingly inappropriate and tone-deaf that I initially thought it must be some kind of mistake, or that my mother had accidentally sent a message intended for someone else, since I couldn't comprehend how anyone could send cheerful updates about a party to someone who was actively burying her husband at that exact moment. But the follow-up messages made it clear that Patricia was indeed sending real-time updates about Rebecca's celebration while I was standing at David's grave, apparently believing that I would want to hear about how wonderful my sister's party was, while I was experiencing the most devastating and final moment of my husband's funeral. The country club is gorgeous, and Rebecca looks absolutely radiant. Trevor's parents have done such an amazing job with the decorations and catering. The whole family is here celebrating this special milestone together. The exclamation points and enthusiastic tone of the message about family celebration were particularly cruel, given that they were being sent to me while I was watching my husband's body being committed to the earth, surrounded by his grieving family members who were providing the support and presence that my own relatives had refused to offer. But the messages continued throughout the burial service, creating a surreal and painful contrast between the sacred ceremony I was experiencing and the recreational celebration that my family had prioritized over being present during my greatest need for their comfort and solidarity. Rebecca just showed everyone her engagement ring, and it's absolutely stunning. The photographer is getting such beautiful pictures of the whole family together. This is definitely going to be one of those days we remember forever. Have you ever been at your spouse's burial while receiving cheerful text messages about the party your family chose to attend instead of supporting you during the most devastating moment of your life? That's exactly what I experienced as my phone buzzed with enthusiastic updates about Rebecca's celebration while David's casket was being covered with earth. The phone calls began as soon as the burial service concluded, and I was accepting final condolences from the people who had come to honor David's memory and support me through this devastating ceremony. The persistent ringing created an intrusion that felt violating and inappropriate given the sacred nature of the moment, and my need to process the finality of David's burial without distractions from people who had already demonstrated their lack of respect for this ceremony. When I finally answered my mother's call, her voice was filled with the cheerful excitement of someone who had been enjoying a wonderful party, rather than showing any awareness that she was speaking to her daughter, who had just finished burying her husband without any support from her blood family. "Catherine, I'm so glad I reached you," Patricia said, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. "Rebecca's party has been absolutely perfect, and we really need you to come over here right now to be part of this celebration. The whole family is asking where you are, and it doesn't look good that Rebecca's own sister isn't here for her engagement announcement." The demand that I leave David's burial to attend Rebecca's party was so shocking and inappropriate that I couldn't initially formulate a response, struggling to process that my mother was actually asking me to abandon my husband's funeral activities to participate in the social celebration that she had prioritized over supporting me during my grief. "Mom, I just finished burying my husband," I replied. "David's body was just lowered into the ground, and I'm saying goodbye to the most important person in my life. How can you possibly think I should come to Rebecca's party right now?" But Patricia seemed genuinely confused by my resistance to her demand, apparently believing that David's funeral was now over, and that I should be ready to move on to more pleasant family activities rather than understanding that grief and loss require time, space, and continued support from people who claim to love and care about the bereaved person. "The funeral is finished, isn't it?" Patricia replied. "David has been properly buried, and now it's time to focus on celebrating life and supporting Rebecca during her special moment. Family means being there for each other during happy times, not just dwelling on sad events that can't be changed." The characterization of David's death as a sad event that should be followed immediately by celebrating life revealed such a fundamental misunderstanding of grief and loss that I realized my mother had no comprehension of what I was experiencing or what kind of support I needed during this devastating period. "This isn't dwelling on sad events," I said. "This is processing the death of my life partner and beginning the long journey of grief that follows losing someone you love. I'm not ready to celebrate anything, and I need time and space to honor David's memory without pretending to be happy about other people's good news." But my mother continued to pressure me to attend Rebecca's party, apparently believing that my presence was required to complete the family celebration, and that my grief should be subordinated to Rebecca's desire for comprehensive family participation in her engagement announcement. "Rebecca really needs you here," Patricia insisted, "and everyone is asking why you're not part of this important family milestone. It's starting to look like you're being selfish and letting your own problems affect Rebecca's special day." The accusation that I was being selfish for grieving my husband's death instead of celebrating my sister's engagement was so cruel and inappropriate that it completed my understanding of how fundamentally my family had failed me during the most difficult experience of my life. The 36 missed calls that accumulated on my phone during the remainder of David's burial and the reception that followed at his parents' house represented the crescendo of my family's inappropriate demands that I abandon my grief to participate in their celebration, each unanswered call representing their escalating frustration that I was not complying with their expectations about how I should prioritize their desires over my own emotional needs. The voicemail messages that my family members left revealed the extent of their self-centeredness and their complete inability to understand that their behavior was cruel rather than reasonable, with each message becoming more demanding and accusatory as they realized I was not going to abandon David's memorial activities to attend Rebecca's party. "Catherine, this is ridiculous," Rebecca's voice said in one of the messages. "My engagement party is a once-in-a-lifetime event, and you're ruining it by being absent when the whole family should be celebrating together. David is dead and can't be helped by your staying at the cemetery, but I'm alive and need my family's support during this important milestone." The direct comparison between David's death and Rebecca's engagement, with the suggestion that David can't be helped while Rebecca needed support, revealed such shocking callousness and selfishness that I realized my sister viewed my husband's death primarily as an inconvenience that was interfering with her social celebration, rather than understanding it as a tragedy that deserved respect and appropriate grieving time. But Rebecca's message was followed by even more demanding communications from other family members who were apparently coordinating their pressure campaign to force me to abandon David's funeral activities in favor of participating in their party. "Catherine, you're embarrassing the whole family by not being here," my Aunt Linda's message said. "People are starting to ask questions about why Rebecca's sister isn't celebrating with us, and it's creating awkward conversations that are spoiling the party atmosphere. You need to put aside your personal feelings and think about what's best for family unity." The suggestion that I should put aside personal feelings about my husband's death to avoid spoiling the party atmosphere at Rebecca's celebration was so breathtakingly insensitive that it confirmed my understanding that my family members were fundamentally selfish people who viewed my tragedy as less important than their social enjoyment. The final message that would permanently end my relationship with my blood relatives came from my father, whose voice carried anger and frustration rather than any acknowledgement that their behavior had been inappropriate or hurtful to someone who was grieving the sudden loss of her life partner. "Catherine, your absence from Rebecca's party is causing problems for the whole family," Robert said, "and your mother is getting upset because people are asking why you're not here to celebrate your sister's engagement. This selfish behavior needs to stop immediately. David is dead, but the rest of us are still living, and we have the right to celebrate important family milestones without your grief casting a shadow over everyone else's happiness." The demand that my grief should not cast a shadow over their celebration, combined with the characterization of my funeral attendance as selfish behavior, revealed that my father viewed my emotional needs as less important than protecting other family members from any uncomfortable reminders that death and loss were part of human experience. But Robert's message also contained the insight that would guide my response to their cruel treatment. He was absolutely correct that the rest of them were still living while David was dead, which meant they would be able to experience the consequences I was about to create for people who had abandoned their daughter and sister during her husband's funeral in favor of attending a party. The decision to use David's life insurance proceeds to teach my family about consequences was both emotionally satisfying and practically effective, since the $800,000 benefit provided substantial resources for creating long-term financial and legal problems for people who had demonstrated such callous disregard for family obligation and human decency during my greatest crisis. But before implementing my plans for justice, I needed to complete the immediate obligations of David's death, including estate settlement, insurance claims, and the practical arrangements that would allow me to focus entirely on ensuring that my family faced appropriate consequences for their heartless abandonment during my husband's funeral. The insurance claim was processed efficiently, providing me with the financial resources I needed to take extended time off work while planning comprehensive revenge against family members who had shown their true character through their choice to prioritize my sister's party over supporting me during David's burial and the most devastating experience of my life. But the most important aspect of my planning was ensuring that the consequences I created would be permanent and irreversible. Teaching my family that some betrayals are so fundamental and cruel that they destroy relationships forever while creating lasting problems for people who demonstrate such shocking selfishness and insensitivity. The revenge strategy I developed was comprehensive and legally sophisticated, designed to use David's insurance money and my own professional knowledge to create financial, legal, and social consequences that would demonstrate exactly what happened when people abandoned family members during their darkest hours while prioritizing recreational activities over sacred obligations and human decency. Working with a team of attorneys, private investigators, and financial specialists, I began implementing a multifaceted approach that would address my family's cruel behavior through legitimate business and legal channels, while ensuring that their abandonment of me during David's funeral would result in lasting consequences that reflected the magnitude of their betrayal. The first phase of my plan involved using David's insurance proceeds to systematically purchase the mortgages, business loans, and other debts that my family members had with various financial institutions, giving me legal authority over their financial obligations while providing leverage for ensuring they understood the seriousness of their cruel treatment during my husband's funeral. Your family members have substantial debts spread across multiple lenders, financial consultant Patricia Chen explained during our strategy session, and purchasing these obligations would give you significant influence over their financial stability while creating opportunities for legal pressure that reflects their abandonment during your time of greatest need. The debt acquisition process was complex, but legally straightforward, involving negotiations with banks and lending institutions that were willing to sell family debt obligations to third parties, who demonstrated financial capability and legitimate business reasons for acquiring the loans and mortgages that represented my relatives' financial vulnerabilities. But beyond the immediate leverage that debt ownership would provide, the most important aspect of my strategy was ensuring that my family members understood the connection between their cruel behavior during David's funeral and the financial consequences they would experience as a result of their heartless abandonment when I needed their support most. The second phase involved hiring private investigators to document the elaborate social media celebration that my family had created around Rebecca's engagement party, including the photos and videos they had posted while I was burying my husband, providing comprehensive evidence of their priorities and decision-making that would be useful for social and legal consequences. Your family documented their choice extensively on social media, private investigator James Rodriguez explained, posting photos and celebratory messages while you were at your husband's funeral, creating permanent evidence of their priorities and the cruel timing of their celebration versus their absence from your husband's burial ceremony. The social media documentation provided irrefutable evidence that my family had chosen party celebration over funeral attendance, creating a permanent record of their heartless behavior that would be useful for destroying their reputations and social relationships once their cruel treatment of a grieving widow became public knowledge. But the most satisfying aspect of the investigation was discovering that several family members had posted specific comments about their choice, including statements that revealed their callous attitude toward my grief and their belief that Rebecca's party was more important than supporting me during David's funeral. "Catherine is being overdramatic about the funeral timing," one of my cousin's posts read. "Rebecca's engagement party was planned months ago, and we can't let sad events prevent us from celebrating happy milestones. Life goes on, and families should focus on positive occasions rather than dwelling on death." The documented evidence of their cruel attitudes and callous justifications would be crucial for the public exposure that would destroy their reputations, while ensuring that their community understood exactly what kind of people would abandon a grieving family member during a funeral to attend a recreational party. The third phase of my revenge strategy involved using my professional connections in the Seattle business community to ensure that my family members' cruel behavior during David's funeral became widely known among their employers, professional associates, and social connections, creating lasting consequences for their reputations and career prospects. Your family members work in industries where reputation and character matter, business consultant Michael Torres explained, and their abandonment of a grieving widow during her husband's funeral represents the kind of moral failure that creates lasting professional and social consequences when it becomes public knowledge. The reputation destruction would be comprehensive and permanent, ensuring that people who had demonstrated such shocking callousness during a family tragedy would face social and professional consequences that reflected their cruel character and inappropriate priorities. But beyond immediate social consequences, the most important outcome would be ensuring that my family members understood that their abandonment during David's funeral had revealed their true character so completely that our relationships were permanently destroyed and that they would face ongoing consequences for their heartless behavior. The fourth phase involved legal action against family members who had made specific statements or taken actions that created additional harm beyond their simple absence from David's funeral, including defamation claims and harassment charges that would result in court proceedings and financial penalties for their cruel treatment. Several family members made statements that could constitute defamation or emotional distress, attorney Sarah Johnson explained. and their coordinated pressure campaign to force you to abandon your husband's funeral activities creates legal liability for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The legal proceedings would be public and permanent, creating official records of their cruel behavior while generating legal fees and potential financial judgments that would provide lasting consequences for people who had treated a grieving widow with such shocking callousness and inappropriate demands. But the legal action would also provide official vindication of my position that their behavior had been inappropriate and harmful, creating court documentation that their abandonment during David's funeral constituted cruel treatment that warranted legal consequences and financial penalties. The implementation of my comprehensive revenge strategy began 6 months after David's funeral, allowing sufficient time for proper grieving and legal preparation, while ensuring that my family members had enough time to demonstrate whether they would acknowledge their cruel behavior or continue justifying their abandonment during my darkest hour. The debt acquisitions were completed first, giving me legal control over mortgages and loans that represented my family members' financial security, while providing immediate leverage for ensuring they understood the seriousness of their cruel treatment during David's funeral. We've successfully acquired your parents' mortgage, your sister's car loans, and several credit card debts from other family members, financial consultant Patricia Chen reported, giving you legal authority over approximately $400,000 in family debt obligations that can be called due immediately if the borrowers default on their payment terms or violate loan conditions. The debt ownership provided immediate power over my family's financial stability while creating opportunities for legal pressure that would demonstrate the consequences of abandoning family members during their greatest crisis and most sacred obligations. But the most satisfying aspect of owning their debts was the knowledge that their financial security was now dependent on someone they had treated with shocking cruelty and callousness, creating a reversal of power dynamics that reflected their betrayal during David's funeral. The social media exposure began simultaneously, with strategic release of documentation showing my family's celebration photos alongside evidence that they had been posted while I was burying my husband, creating viral content that generated widespread condemnation and social consequences for their heartless behavior. The social media exposure is generating exactly the kind of public outrage we expected, reputation specialist David Martinez explained, with thousands of shares and comments expressing shock and disgust at family members who would abandon a widow during her husband's funeral to attend a party. The viral exposure of their cruel behavior created immediate and lasting damage to their reputations, while ensuring that their community understood exactly what kind of people would prioritize party attendance over supporting a grieving family member during a funeral ceremony. But beyond immediate social consequences, the public exposure created permanent documentation of their character that would affect their relationships and opportunities for years to come, ensuring that their cruel treatment during David's funeral would have lasting repercussions. The confrontation that would expose the full extent of my revenge strategy came when my family members realized that their financial and social stability had been systematically destroyed by someone they had abandoned during her husband's funeral, leading to desperate attempts at reconciliation that revealed their complete lack of understanding about the magnitude of their betrayal. Catherine, we need to talk about what's happening with our mortgage and these social media problems, my mother called to say, her voice filled with panic and confusion rather than any acknowledgement that their current difficulties were connected to their cruel treatment during David's funeral. What problems are you referring to? I replied calmly, enjoying the opportunity to make my family members explain their difficulties, while they remained unaware that their financial and social crises were the direct result of my comprehensive revenge strategy. Our mortgage company says that our loan has been sold to a new lender who's demanding immediate payment of the full balance, Patricia explained desperately. And there are terrible things being posted about us online that are affecting Robert's job and our standing in the community. We don't understand what's happening or why we're facing these problems. The confusion in my mother's voice was genuine, as she apparently couldn't conceive that their financial and reputation crises might be connected to their abandonment of me during David's funeral. or that their cruel behavior might have consequences that extended beyond immediate family relationships. "Those sound like serious problems," I replied. "What kind of terrible things are being posted about you online?" "There are posts everywhere showing pictures from Rebecca's engagement party, alongside accusations that we abandoned you during David's funeral," Patricia continued, her voice becoming more panicked as she described the social media exposure that was destroying their reputations. "People are calling us heartless and cruel, and some of Robert's clients are saying they don't want to work with someone who would treat their own daughter so badly." The description of the social media consequences was exactly what I had hoped to achieve. Creating public accountability for family members who had demonstrated such shocking callousness during a funeral ceremony that represented one of life's most sacred and difficult experiences. "Why would people think you abandoned me during David's funeral?" I asked, pretending ignorance while enjoying my mother's discomfort as she was forced to confront the reality of her cruel behavior and its public exposure. "Because we went to Rebecca's engagement party instead of attending David's service," Patricia admitted reluctantly. "But that was just a scheduling conflict, and we had family obligations to Rebecca too. We didn't abandon you. We just had to make difficult choices about which family events to attend." The continued characterization of choosing between my husband's funeral and my sister's party as difficult choices about scheduling conflicts revealed that my mother still didn't understand the moral distinction between sacred obligations and recreational activities, or the magnitude of betrayal their absence had represented. "Did you consider rescheduling Rebecca's party so the family could attend David's funeral together?" I asked, knowing the answer but wanting to force her to acknowledge their priorities and decision-making process. Rebecca's party was planned by Trevor's parents, and we couldn't ask them to change their arrangements just because of the funeral timing, Patricia replied, revealing that they had prioritized strangers' party planning over supporting their own daughter during her husband's burial ceremony. "So Trevor's parents' party planning was more important than being present while I buried my husband?" I asked, making the moral choice explicit and undeniable. The silence that followed my question was long and uncomfortable, as Patricia apparently struggled to find justification for their behavior that didn't sound as cruel and selfish as their actual decision-making had been. "Catherine, we made the best decision we could under difficult circumstances," Patricia finally replied, still avoiding acknowledgement that their choice had been inappropriate and hurtful. "And we don't understand why you're being so vindictive about what happened. We're family, and families should forgive each other's mistakes and move forward together." The characterization of abandoning me during David's funeral as a mistake that I should forgive revealed that my mother still didn't understand that some betrayals are so fundamental and cruel that they permanently destroy relationships and warrant lasting consequences for people who demonstrate such shocking callousness. "There's nothing to forgive," I replied, "because you made a conscious choice that revealed your true character and priorities. You chose Rebecca's party over David's funeral, and now you're experiencing the consequences of that choice." But Patricia was still focused on getting help with her financial and reputation problems, rather than acknowledging the connection between her cruel behavior and the difficulties she was now facing. "Can you help us understand what's happening with these debt problems and social media attacks?" Patricia pleaded. "We're facing serious financial and social consequences that seem coordinated and deliberate, and we need help figuring out how to resolve these issues." "It sounds like you're learning about consequences," I replied, "which is something that happens when people make cruel and selfish decisions that hurt the people they claim to love." The conversations with other family members followed similar patterns, with each person expressing confusion and panic about their financial and social problems, while remaining unable or unwilling to acknowledge that their current difficulties were the direct result of their heartless abandonment during David's funeral. Rebecca's call was particularly satisfying, as she had been the primary beneficiary of the family's cruel choice and was now facing the most severe social consequences, as her engagement celebration became associated with the heartless abandonment of a grieving widow. "Catherine, these social media posts are ruining my reputation and affecting my relationship with Trevor," Rebecca said during our conversation. "People are saying terrible things about me and and calling me selfish for having my engagement party while you were burying David. You need to make this stop." The demand that I should make it stop, rather than any acknowledgement that her celebration had been inappropriate and hurtful, revealed that Rebecca still viewed herself as the victim, rather than understanding that she had been the beneficiary of cruel family behavior that deserved social consequences. "What terrible things are people saying about you?" I asked, enjoying the opportunity to make Rebecca confront the public reaction to her role in the family's abandonment during David's funeral. "They're saying I'm a selfish bride who forced my family to choose my party over my sister's husband's funeral," Rebecca replied, "and that I'm heartless for celebrating while you were grieving. Trevor's parents are embarrassed by the negative attention, and some of our wedding vendors are questioning whether they want to be associated with our celebration." The description of the social consequences was exactly what Rebecca deserved for benefiting from her family's cruel abandonment of me during David's funeral, and the impact on her wedding planning provided appropriate consequences for someone who had prioritized her own celebration over family loyalty and human decency. "Were people forced to choose your party over David's funeral?" I asked, making Rebecca confront the reality of what had happened rather than allowing her to minimize or deflect responsibility for the family's cruel behavior. "Well, technically yes," Rebecca admitted reluctantly. "But it wasn't my fault that the timing conflicted, and I had already planned my party before David died. I couldn't help the scheduling problems that made people choose between events." The continued deflection of responsibility, while acknowledging that family members had indeed chosen her party over David's funeral, revealed that Rebecca understood exactly what had happened, but was unwilling to accept accountability for her role in the cruel abandonment that had left me without family support during my husband's burial. "Did you suggest rescheduling your party so the family could support me during David's funeral?" I asked, knowing she had not but wanting her to acknowledge her selfish priorities. "My party was already planned, and Trevor's parents had invested too much money to change everything," Rebecca replied, revealing that financial considerations about party expenses had been more important to her than family loyalty and supporting her sister during a tragedy. "So, party expenses were more important than being present while I buried my husband?" I asked, making her moral choice explicit and undeniable. The silence that followed was telling, as Rebecca apparently realized that any honest answer would confirm her selfishness and inappropriate priorities during my greatest crisis and need for family support. "Catherine, I know you're upset about the timing," Rebecca finally said, "but what's happening now with these social media attacks is going too far. You're destroying my reputation and affecting innocent people like Trevor who weren't involved in the decision-making about which events to attend." The concern about innocent people like Trevor being affected by social consequences was particularly ironic, since Rebecca had shown no concern about how her selfish choices would affect me during David's funeral, or how her family's abandonment would impact my grief and recovery process. But Rebecca's distress about social consequences was exactly what she deserved for prioritizing her own celebration over family loyalty, and her reputation damage was appropriate punishment for someone who had benefited from cruel behavior that left a grieving widow without family support during her husband's burial. The final phase of my revenge strategy involved revealing to my family that I had been responsible for their financial and social consequences, ensuring they understood that their abandonment during David's funeral had been met with deliberate and comprehensive retaliation that reflected the magnitude of their betrayal. "I bought your debts and orchestrated the social media exposure," I told my mother during our final conversation about her financial problems, "because you abandoned me during David's funeral to attend Rebecca's party, revealing your true character and priorities in ways that warranted lasting consequences." The shock in Patricia's voice was genuine and complete as she realized that her daughter had systematically destroyed her financial security and reputation as retaliation for the cruel abandonment during David's funeral. "You did this to your own family?" Patricia asked. "You deliberately created these problems to punish us for making different choices about which family events to attend." "I created consequences for people who abandoned their daughter and sister during her husband's funeral," I corrected. Because you revealed that Rebecca's party was more important to you than supporting me during the most devastating experience of my life. The conversation that followed was Patricia's desperate attempt to minimize their behavior and negotiate some kind of resolution that would restore their financial security and repair their reputations. But I was unmoved by her pleas and unwilling to reverse consequences that were appropriate punishment for their heartless cruelty. "We made a mistake, but we're still family," Patricia pleaded. "And families should forgive each other and work together to solve problems, rather than creating more difficulties through revenge and retaliation." "You're not my family," I replied. "Family members support each other during tragedies and sacred ceremonies like funerals. You're people who prioritized a party over being present while I buried my husband, and that choice revealed your true character so completely that we have no relationship worth preserving." The finality in my voice apparently convinced Patricia that I was serious about permanently ending our relationship and maintaining the consequences I had created for their cruel behavior, leading to increasingly desperate attempts to negotiate some kind of reconciliation that would restore their previous life stability. But I had learned that some betrayals are so fundamental and cruel that they cannot be forgiven or forgotten, and that people who would abandon a grieving family member during a funeral ceremony have revealed character flaws that make them unworthy of continued relationship or trust. The aftermath of my comprehensive revenge strategy was both satisfying and liberating, as I watched my family members struggle with the permanent consequences of their heartless behavior while I built a new life surrounded by people who understood the value of loyalty, compassion, and appropriate support during times of crisis and grief. My parents ultimately lost their home through foreclosure when I called in their mortgage, while their damaged reputations affected Robert's business relationships and Patricia's social standing in ways that created lasting isolation and financial hardship. Rebecca's wedding was significantly scaled down due to vendor cancellations and social pressure, while her relationship with Trevor was permanently damaged by the negative publicity surrounding her role in the family's cruel abandonment during David's funeral. But the most important outcome was my liberation from family relationships that had been based on obligation rather than genuine love and support, freeing me to build chosen family connections with people who demonstrated real loyalty and compassion, rather than conditional affection that disappeared when convenient alternatives presented themselves. The life I rebuilt with David's insurance money and my own career success was everything he would have wanted for me, filled with people who valued kindness and integrity, dedicated to causes that honored his memory, and free from relatives who had revealed themselves to be fundamentally selfish people who prioritized parties over sacred obligations and human decency. If you're reading this and you've experienced betrayal from family members who abandoned you during your darkest hour, please know that their behavior revealed their true character and that you deserve relationships with people who understand the value of loyalty and support during times of crisis and grief. Some betrayals are so cruel and fundamental that they permanently destroy relationships, and there is no obligation to maintain connections with people who have demonstrated that their love is conditional and their support unreliable when you need them most. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to create consequences for people who have hurt you so deeply that forgiveness would only enable continued cruel behavior and teach them that their betrayal has no lasting impact on their comfort and security. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had family members abandon you during a crisis while prioritizing their own entertainment and social activities? How did you handle relatives who showed such shocking callousness during your time of greatest need? Your story might help someone else who's dealing with family betrayal and needs to understand that some cruel behavior warrants permanent consequences and relationship termination. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that you deserve family relationships based on genuine love and unwavering support rather than conditional affection that disappears when more attractive alternatives present themselves. See you in our next story here on Her Sweet Revenge.